December 12, 1944. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. At 0300 hours, temperatures hovering just below freezing, Sergeant First Class Robert Mitchell of the 2nd Armored Division sat inside his Sherman tank, listening to the metallic clanking of track links as his crew performed pre-dawn maintenance. Every rotation produced that distinctive sound, the rhythmic clank, clank, clank that had announced American armor presence since North Africa. What Mitchell and his crew believed that frozen morning was that German forces could hear them coming from over a kilometer away. What they would discover within 72 hours would fundamentally transform how armored warfare was conducted for the remainder of the conflict. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the account of how a simple maintenance innovation, dismissed by military engineers as impossible, would turn American tank crews into ghost hunters who moved through European forests like shadows, and how German armored commanders would report encounters that defied everything they knew about mechanized warfare. Colonel Heinrich Bauer of the German armored forces had been commanding tank operations since the campaigns in France during 1940. His combat diary, recovered from archives in 1997, recorded entries with meticulous precision. On December 8, 1944, he wrote that American Sherman tanks could be detected orally at distances of 1,200 to 1,500 meters under optimal conditions. The distinctive metallic percussion of track links against wheels, amplified by the steel construction and carrying through cold air, provided German forces with critical early warning. This acoustic signature had been documented in 73 separate after-action reports filed between June and November of that year. At a maintenance depot 17 kilometers behind American lines, Master Sergeant Thomas O'Brien of the Ordnance Corps was facing a different problem entirely. The official designation was premature track wear, but O'Brien called it what it was. Tracks were disintegrating faster than supply chains could replace them. His maintenance logs showed that Sherman tanks were experiencing track link failures at rates 30% higher than projected by engineering specifications. The culprit was a combination of frozen mud, icy roads, and constant movement through forested terrain where rocks and debris created grinding friction between metal surfaces. O'Brien had served in North Africa, where sand had been the enemy. In Sicily, it had been volcanic rock. Now, in the frozen forests of Belgium, ice crystals formed microscopic cutting edges that worked between track links and drive wheels. He had requisitioned lubricants from supply, the standard molybdenum grease rated for temperatures down to -20 degrees Celsius. It helped, marginally. Track life improved by perhaps 8%, not enough. On December 9th, a supply truck arrived with what the manifest listed as industrial soap compounds. Consignment number 774-B, 20 wooden crates, each containing 48 bars of what appeared to be oversized laundry soap. The shipping papers indicated it was meant for field laundries attached to the Third Army. Someone in logistics had made an error. Private First Class James DeMarco, assigned to O'Brien's maintenance section, opened the first crate. The bars were roughly rectangular, each weighing approximately 450 grams, composed of a mixture of tallow, lye, and what the chemical specification sheet listed as proprietary friction-reducing compounds. DeMarco, who had worked in his father's automotive repair shop in Pittsburgh before the conflict, picked up one bar and squeezed it. The material had a peculiar consistency, not quite solid, not quite soft. It left a slick residue on his fingers. What happened next would be disputed in 3 separate military investigations conducted between 1945 and 1947. According to DeMarco's testimony, he was cleaning track assemblies removed from a Sherman that had thrown a track during night movement. The frozen mud was resistant to standard wire brushes. Someone suggested using the soap to help break down the grime. DeMarco dissolved half a bar in warm water and applied it to the track links. The mud came off, but more significantly, when he ran his hand along the cleaned surface, the metal felt different, smoother. The soap had left behind a microscopic film. O'Brien observed this and conducted an experiment. He took 2 track links, identical specifications, both showing equivalent wear patterns. He coated one with standard molybdenum grease. He coated the other with a mixture of the soap compound, dissolved in minimal water, to create a thick paste. He then subjected both to a simple friction test, dragging each across a steel plate under identical pressure. The soap-coated link moved with approximately 40% less resistance. That evening, O'Brien approached Captain Raymond Foster, the battalion maintenance officer. Foster's background was mechanical engineering from Purdue University, class of 1937. He listened to O'Brien's report with the skepticism of someone who had reviewed dozens of field modifications that violated engineering principles. Soap as a track lubricant? The concept seemed absurd. Soap would wash away in rain. Soap would freeze in cold temperatures. Soap had no place in military specifications for armored vehicle maintenance. O'Brien requested permission to conduct a field trial. 1 tank, 1 night patrol. Foster agreed, primarily because track wear was becoming a critical issue that threatened operational readiness. If tanks were losing mobility due to maintenance failures, any potential solution deserved investigation. The tank selected was an M4 Sherman, serial number 307189, commanded by Sergeant Mitchell. Mitchell's crew had been complaining about track noise for weeks. German positions were close enough in the Ardennes that sound discipline was becoming as important as visual camouflage. Mitchell's gunner, Corporal Eddie Sullivan from Boston, swore he could hear German voices across the valley during quiet moments. If the Germans could hear voices, they certainly could hear tank tracks. December 10th, 2200 hours. O'Brien's maintenance team removed the track assemblies from Mitchell's Sherman. The process required 4 hours. Each track link was cleaned, inspected, and then coated with a mixture of the soap compound that had been refined through additional testing. The formula that emerged was approximately 60% soap, 30% standard grease, and 10% diesel fuel to aid penetration into metal surfaces. The mixture was applied warm, allowing it to flow into every crevice between links, pins, and wheels. When the tracks were reinstalled and the tank's engine started, Mitchell noticed the difference immediately. The characteristic clanking was muted, not eliminated, but reduced to perhaps 30% of its previous volume. More significantly, the tonal quality changed. Instead of sharp metallic percussion, the sound became more of a muffled rumble, similar to the ambient noise of the engine itself. Mitchell's tank departed on patrol at 0100 hours on December 11th. The mission was routine reconnaissance, move 3 kilometers forward, observe German positions, return before dawn. The route took them through forested terrain where acoustic detection was a primary concern. At 0230, Mitchell's tank passed within approximately 400 meters of a German observation post. This position had been identified through previous patrols. Standard procedure was to move with extreme caution through this sector. Mitchell maintained minimal speed, watching for any indication of detection. There was none. The German position remained quiet. No flares, no radio traffic that American signals intelligence could detect. No change in observable activity. Mitchell's radio operator, Private Leonard Hayes, monitored German tactical frequencies. Hayes had been trained in German language interpretation at Fort Meade. During the 30-minute period that Mitchell's tank was within potential detection range, German communications discussed weather conditions, ration distribution, and a request for additional firewood. Not one transmission mentioned American armor movement. When Mitchell returned to American lines at 0500 hours, he reported the patrol results to Captain Foster. Foster's response was to order immediate testing with additional tanks. If the effect was reproducible, if it wasn't simply luck or German inattention, then this represented something significant. Over the next 48 hours, 6 Sherman tanks received the soap treatment. Each tank was assigned patrol routes that would take them near known German positions. Battalion intelligence compiled reports from all patrols. The data was consistent. Tanks with treated tracks passed undetected at distances where untreated tanks would have certainly been heard. But the most compelling evidence came from an unexpected source. On December 13th, American forces captured a German forward observer who had been operating an acoustic detection station. This soldier, whose name was recorded in intelligence reports as Gefreiter Klaus Werner, was responsible for reporting American armor movement. During interrogation, Werner was asked about American tank activity during the previous 72 hours. He reported that there had been no American armor in his sector during that period. When interrogators showed him aerial reconnaissance photographs proving that American tanks had passed within 500 meters of his position on 3 separate occasions, Werner insisted the photographs must be in error. He would have heard them, he explained. He had been trained specifically to detect tank movement by sound. It was impossible that American armor could have approached that close without detection. Werner's testimony was documented by Lieutenant Michael Romano of military intelligence. Romano's report noted that Werner showed genuine confusion, not deception. Werner believed his own statement. He had not heard the tanks because the tanks had not made the sounds he had been trained to recognize. The soap treatment began spreading through American armored units in the Ardennes. The process required approximately 6 hours per tank and consumed roughly 12 bars of soap per vehicle. Supply officers scrambled to requisition additional soap compounds. The original misdelivered shipment had contained 960 bars. That was sufficient for approximately 80 tanks. Not nearly enough for division-level deployment. Here the story takes an unexpected turn, involving procurement bureaucracy and creative logistics. Major Sarah Henderson, a supply officer with the Third Army, received requests for thousands of bars of industrial soap. The requests cited urgent tactical necessity, but provided no explanation of actual use. Henderson's background was accounting and business administration. She understood that requisitions required justification tied to official supply categories. There was no category for soap as a tactical combat supply. Henderson contacted O'Brien directly, bypassing normal chain of command. O'Brien explained the situation. Henderson's response was to reclassify the soap requisition as cold weather vehicle maintenance compound, Type 7, which was a category that allowed for field expedient solutions to mechanical problems. This reclassification allowed her to requisition soap from civilian industrial sources without triggering questions about tactical application. By December 20th, Henderson had arranged delivery of 17,000 bars through a combination of military supply chains and civilian contractors. The soap began arriving in quantities sufficient to treat entire armored battalions. German combat reports from late December 1944 through January 1945 show a pattern of confusion regarding American armor deployment. Colonel Bauer's diary entries from this period record what he described as phantom tanks, acoustic contacts that appeared and disappeared without visual confirmation, reported armor positions that couldn't be verified, and a general deterioration in the reliability of sound-based detection. On January 7, 1945, Bauer wrote that his forces had encountered an American armored column during morning twilight. The engagement occurred at a range of approximately 800 meters. What disturbed Bauer was that his forward observers had reported no advance warning. The American tanks had simply appeared. There had been no acoustic signature, no preliminary indication of movement. Bauer noted that this violated every principle of armored warfare he had learned. Tanks announced themselves through sound. That was fundamental to how armored forces operated. The soap treatment had additional benefits beyond acoustic suppression. Maintenance crews discovered that treated tracks lasted approximately 25% longer than untreated tracks under equivalent operating conditions. The soap film reduced metal-to-metal friction, which decreased wear on pins, links, and wheel surfaces. Fuel efficiency improved marginally because engines worked less hard to overcome track resistance. These secondary effects were documented in maintenance reports filed throughout January and February of 1945. But perhaps the most significant impact was psychological. American tank crews gained confidence in their ability to move without detection. This confidence translated into more aggressive patrolling, closer approach to German positions, and willingness to conduct reconnaissance that previously would have been considered too risky. German forces, conversely, experienced increasing uncertainty about the reliability of their acoustic detection capabilities. Private First Class DeMarco, the maintenance specialist who had first discovered the soap's properties, was interviewed by military historians in 1989. DeMarco recalled that the innovation emerged not from scientific research or engineering design, but from practical necessity combined with accidental observation. Nobody had theorized that soap would work. Nobody had predicted the acoustic effects. The discovery was empirical, the result of field conditions forcing creative problem-solving. The German military did eventually identify what was happening. Captured American tanks examined in late January showed residue on track assemblies. German technical intelligence analyzed the composition and recognized it as soap-based compounds. However, by this time, German industrial capacity was degraded to the point where producing equivalent materials for their own armored forces was impractical. Even if they had the formula, implementing it across their remaining tank forces would have required resources that no longer existed. After the conflict ended, military engineers conducted formal analysis of the soap treatment method. The technical explanation involved surface chemistry and acoustic dampening through vibration absorption. The soap created a boundary layer between metal surfaces that converted impact energy into heat rather than allowing it to propagate as sound waves. The effect was measurable, but had never been predicted by theoretical models because nobody had thought to test soap as a tactical lubricant. The official designation became Field Expedient Track Treatment, Acoustic Suppression Type 1. The informal designation used by tank crews was simply soap tracks. Post-action reports from the final months of the conflict in Europe contain numerous references to units employing soap tracks for night operations, reconnaissance, and approaches to fortified positions. Sergeant Mitchell survived the conflict and returned to civilian life in Ohio. In a letter written to the Army Historical Division in 1963, Mitchell reflected on the soap treatment innovation. He wrote that the most remarkable aspect wasn't the technical achievement, but rather how something so simple had been overlooked by military engineering for years. The answer to acoustic detection had been sitting in supply depots classified as laundry soap, while engineers pursued complex solutions involving rubber padding and hydraulic dampening systems. Master Sergeant O'Brien received a commendation for his initiative in developing the soap treatment method. The commendation noted that his innovation had contributed to tactical advantages during critical operations in the winter of 1944 through 45. O'Brien's response, according to colleagues, was characteristically modest. He said he had simply been trying to make tracks last longer. The acoustic benefits were unexpected. The broader lesson from the soap track innovation relates to how military organizations approach problem-solving. Official engineering channels worked through formal research, controlled testing, and adherence to specifications. Field innovation worked through observation, experimentation, and practical application. The gap between these two approaches was significant. Ideas that emerged from field conditions often took months or years to filter through bureaucratic channels to reach engineering departments. By that time, the tactical situation had usually changed. Major Henderson, the supply officer who had facilitated soap procurement, later wrote a paper for the Army Logistics Review about adaptive supply chain management. Her central argument was that logistics officers needed authority to respond rapidly to field requirements without waiting for formal specification changes. The soap requisition had succeeded because she had found a bureaucratic workaround. A more efficient system would have allowed direct response to tactical needs. The German perspective on American armor tactics underwent significant revision during the winter months of 1945. Intelligence assessments began describing American forces as employing advanced sound suppression technology. German technical intelligence reports speculated about sophisticated acoustic dampening systems, possibly involving rubber composites or specialized materials developed through industrial research. The reality that Americans were coating tracks with soap would have seemed absurdly simple. This disconnect between perception and reality illustrates an important aspect of technological warfare. Complexity is often assumed where simplicity exists. German analysts, working within a framework that valued engineering sophistication, interpreted American acoustic suppression as evidence of advanced technical development. They were partially correct. American industrial capacity was indeed superior. But in this specific case, the advantage came not from complex engineering, but from practical field innovation. The soap treatment method continued to be used through the end of the conflict in Europe. As American forces advanced into Germany, maintenance procedures standardized around the soap application process. Training manuals were updated to include instructions for proper treatment application. Supply chains incorporated soap compounds as standard items for armored units. One particularly interesting incident occurred in March of 1945, when American forces encountered German tank units that had apparently attempted to replicate the soap treatment. Examination of these vehicles showed crude application of animal fats mixed with various binding agents. The mixture was ineffective because the ratios were incorrect, and the binding agents used actually increased friction rather than reducing it. German forces lacked both the correct formula and the industrial capacity to produce effective compounds, even if they had the formula. By April 1945, American armored forces were operating with what amounted to standard acoustic suppression across most units. The tactical advantage this provided during the final operations of the conflict is difficult to quantify precisely, but multiple after-action reports cite instances where American tanks achieved surprise during approaches that would have been detected months earlier. Private Hayes, Mitchell's radio operator, kept personal notes throughout his service. These notes, donated to the National Archives in 2003, include observations about how German tactical radio communications changed between December 1944 and March 1945. Early intercepts showed German forces reporting American armor movements with confidence and precision. Later intercepts showed increasing uncertainty, more requests for visual confirmation, and growing reluctance to rely on acoustic detection alone. The psychological dimension of this technological shift was significant. American crews became more willing to operate at night, to push closer to German positions, and to conduct aggressive reconnaissance. German crews became more defensive, less certain about the battlefield picture they were receiving from their sensors and observers. This shift in confidence levels contributed to tactical outcomes in ways that are difficult to measure, but clearly present in historical records. One of the most telling pieces of evidence comes from German prisoner interrogations conducted in the final weeks of the conflict. When asked about American tactical capabilities, multiple prisoners mentioned that American tanks could move silently, that acoustic detection had become unreliable, and that this created constant uncertainty about American force positions. The word silently is notable. American tanks were not actually silent. They were quieter. But perception often matters more than objective reality in combat situations. The technical specifications of the soap treatment were eventually codified in a field manual published in June of 1945, after the conflict in Europe had ended. The manual, designated Technical Manual 7-34B, provided detailed instructions for mixing ratios, application procedures, and maintenance schedules. The document noted that treatment effectiveness decreased with use and required reapplication approximately every 72 hours of operation. Post-conflict analysis by the Army Ordnance Corps examined why the soap treatment hadn't been discovered earlier. The investigation concluded that several factors had contributed to the delay. First, acoustic suppression had not been identified as a priority research area because military doctrine assumed that tanks were inherently noisy and that stealth was not a realistic tactical option for armored forces. Second, the materials used in the treatment, common soap compounds, were not typically associated with mechanical engineering solutions. Third, field observations about track noise had not been systematically collected or analyzed at levels where engineering research could respond. These conclusions led to reforms in how field observations were collected and channeled to research departments. The reforms came too late to affect the conflict, but they influenced post-conflict military development processes. The individuals involved in developing and deploying the soap treatment went on to varied post-conflict careers. O'Brien returned to civilian life and worked as a mechanical engineer for a manufacturing company in Michigan. He occasionally gave presentations about field innovation to engineering students. His central message was that solutions often exist outside formal frameworks, and that practical observation can reveal opportunities that theoretical analysis misses. DeMarco took over his father's automotive repair business in Pittsburgh. He told customers about his role in the soap track innovation, though few believed that something so simple could have had tactical significance. The story seemed too mundane, too ordinary to be historically important. Mitchell remained in the Army and eventually retired as a command sergeant major in 1967. He kept in contact with several members of his original crew and organized reunions where they would discuss their experiences. The soap tracks were always a topic of conversation. Mitchell's consistent observation was that he remembered clearly the first time his tank moved past German positions without being detected. The feeling had been surreal, like breaking fundamental rules of how warfare worked. Henderson rose to the rank of colonel and served in logistics roles through the Korean conflict. Her innovation in supply chain management, particularly the creative reclassification that enabled soap procurement, became a case study in military logistics courses. The lesson emphasized that effective logistics required not just moving supplies, but understanding tactical requirements and finding ways to meet those requirements within bureaucratic constraints. The German perspective remained largely one of technological surprise. Post-conflict interviews with German armored officers revealed that many continued to believe American forces had deployed sophisticated acoustic suppression systems. When told the actual method involved soap, some officers expressed disbelief. The solution seemed too simple, too improvised to be effective. But effectiveness isn't determined by complexity. It's determined by results. The soap track innovation represents a category of military innovation that receives less attention than major weapon systems or strategic decisions, but which nonetheless affected tactical outcomes. These are the small adaptations, the field modifications, the practical solutions that emerge from necessity and observation rather than formal research programs. In the decades following the conflict, material science advanced to produce specialized lubricants and coatings designed specifically for acoustic suppression. These modern solutions are undoubtedly more effective than soap compounds mixed in field conditions, but they exist because the soap tracks demonstrated that acoustic suppression was tactically valuable. The crude field expedient proved the concept that engineering could then refine. There's something almost poetic about the fact that soap, one of humanity's oldest chemical technologies, dating back thousands of years, found application in 20th century mechanized warfare. The connection between ancient knowledge and modern tactical requirements wasn't obvious. It required specific conditions, specific observations, and individuals willing to experiment outside established procedures. The historical record of the soap track innovation includes technical reports, personal testimonies, maintenance logs, and intelligence assessments. Collectively, these documents paint a picture of how small changes can cascade into broader effects. A maintenance problem leads to experimentation. Experimentation produces unexpected results. Results are systematized and deployed. Deployment changes tactical behavior. Changed behavior affects enemy perceptions and responses. This cascade effect is visible throughout military history, but it's often obscured by focus on major battles and strategic decisions. The soap tracks didn't win the conflict. They contributed to tactical advantages during specific operations in specific conditions. But those tactical advantages accumulated, creating cumulative effects that influenced broader outcomes. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.